Hi, welcome everyone. This is Rebecca Salen. I'm Project Director of the LEAD Center. I want to welcome you to the webinar on what disability advocates need to know about new WIOA equal opportunity provisions. In a moment, we'll have a welcome from Christopher Button from the Office of Disability Employment Policy. Our moderator today is Michael Morris, Executive Director of National Disability Institute and LEAD Center's Public Policy Co-Chair. We want to go over a few housekeeping details before we start. The audio for today's webinar is being broadcast through your computer. Please make sure your speakers are turned on or your headphones are plugged in. You can control the audio broadcast via the audio broadcast panel, and it's pictured on this slide. If you accidentally close the panel, you can reopen it by going to the Communicate menu at the top of the screen and choosing Join Audio Broadcast. If you do not have sound capabilities on your computer, or if you prefer to listen by phone, please dial the numbers that are provided on the screen. You don't need attendee ID to enter. Real-time captioning is provided during this webinar. The captions can be found in the Media Viewer panel, which appears in the lower right-hand corner of the webinar platform. If you want to make the Media Viewer panel larger, you can minimize the other panels like Chat, Q&A, and/or Participants. We encourage you to submit questions. Please use the Q&A box to submit any questions you have during the webinar, and we will direct the questions accordingly during the Q&A portion of the webinar. If you're listening by phone and not logged into the webinar, you also may ask questions by emailing questions to Brittany Taylor at btaylor, B-T-A-Y-L-O-R, at ndi-inc.org. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and the materials will be placed on the LEAD Center website at the link provided. If you experience any technical difficulties during the webinar, please use the chat box to send a message to the host, Brittany Taylor, or you also may email her at btaylor at ndi-inc.org. For those of you who are not familiar with the LEAD Center, we are the National Center on Leadership for the Employment and Economic Advancement of People with Disabilities. We're a collaborative of disability, workforce, and economic empowerment organizations led by National Disability Institute with funding by the U.S. Department of Labor's Office of Disability Employment Policy. We're very excited about today's webinar. I'm going to turn it over to Michael Morris, Executive Director of National Disability Institute, to talk about LEAD's mission and the agenda for today's meeting.
Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you all for joining us today. We had over 800 individuals registered from across the country, individuals in all 50 states, remarkable. We have over 400 people who have already joined us, and the number is going up every second. So this is very, very exciting. As you know, because you're here today, this is a webinar that is about understanding the new equal opportunity provisions of the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act. We have a great list of presenters who are joining us, but let me first share with you the LEAD Center, which is in its 5th year of funding from the Office of Disability Employment Policy, has as its mission to advance sustainable individual and systems level change that results in improved, competitive, integrated employment and economic self-sufficiency outcomes for individuals across the spectrum of disability. We hope that you have joined us for many of our prior webinars that have really focused in on WIOA from a disability perspective, but this one today is adding to that legacy, and we hope will add to your understanding and knowledge that will result in real change in what happens on the ground in communities across the country, in advancing employment and economic self-sufficiency for youth and adults with disabilities. To look at the agenda, we are going to review the new final rules, revising WIOA's equal opportunity provisions, also known as Section 188. We're going to look at the relationship between Section 188 and WIOA disability-related provisions, of which there are many. We will look at promising practices within the Section 188 Disability Reference Guide, which has received great attention and is used as a tool, I hope, by many of you in looking at how to move from policy to practice. We will also look at state and local perspectives on improving access and equal opportunity, and we will definitely have time for a conversation between the panelists and myself, but also I will be watching the chat box to take on some of the questions that you pose as well. So with that, let me introduce you to today's speakers. Lee Pursley, Senior Policy Advisor, Civil Rights Center, U.S. Department of Labor. Jamie Robinson, Manager, Financial Empowerment and Workforce at the National Disability Institute. And Danielle Smith, the State Equal Opportunity Officer for the State of Missouri, Division of Workforce Development. So we will certainly get a perspective from both the federal and the state level. And with that, let me turn it back to Christopher Button, Supervisor of the Workforce Systems Policy Group, Office of Disability Employment Policy, U.S. Department of Labor. Chris?
Christy, maybe on mute.
Well, we are experiencing the first of our technical difficulties. Hopefully, Christopher.
Oh, there they are.
Oh, there you go.
We hear you now.
Apologies for that little glitch. Those of you who know me, that I have under the title of my name, Techno-Peasant. So I got figured out. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Rebecca. And thank you to all of the lead partners who helped put this together today. And thanks in advance to our speakers. We are especially excited about today's presentation. We know that people with disabilities can work. They can work in competitive integrated employment, and that we know that American Job Centers under WIOA are really important partners in making that a reality. In fact, the workforce development system is the backbone of job training and education in the United States. But an essential part of making that all work is accessibility to everyone on an equal basis. And DOL's Civil Rights Center is tasked with ensuring that all people can, in fact, access the programs, services, and benefits provided through the system. So that we are excited to hear today from Lee Pursley about what changes they have made recently to their non-discrimination regulations under Section 188 of WIOA. We are also excited to hear from Jamie and Danielle about how they have used the Section 188 Disability Resource Guide to help further employment and accessibility through American Job Centers in the state of Missouri, and as it expands into other states as well, the work that they are doing. So we're excited. Thank you very much. We look forward to today's discussion. And Michael, I am going to turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Chris. So let's quickly turn to our first speaker, Lee Pursley, Senior Policy Advisor with the Civil Rights Center, U.S. Department of Labor. I think it's important for many of you who probably don't work inside the Beltway here in Washington, D.C. I worked with Lee for many years. He was one of the key staff members to Senator Harkin, played a pivotal role in the wordsmithing, the development of key frameworks within WIOA, and he is now at the Civil Rights Center. So I think, Lee, you bring a very unique perspective from both your time on Capitol Hill and now at CRC. So with that, let me turn it over to you.
Thank you, Michael. That's a very kind introduction, and welcome everyone today to this webinar. So, as promised, now I'm going to talk a little bit about our new civil rights regulations under Section 188 of WIOA, which is short for the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. CRC has updated the regulations implementing the equal opportunity provisions of WIOA, which was signed into law, as most people know, July 2014, with the purpose of protecting participants and other beneficiaries in the workforce development system. As a matter of knowledge, this final rule became effective January 3rd, 2017. And let me talk a little bit about the final rule. The final rule provides important updates to our current regulations, which had not been previously updated since 1999. The old rule didn't reflect the many developments in civil rights law since that time, changes in the Civil Rights Center's enforcement procedures and processes, or new practices of beneficiaries and recipients of WIOA Title I financial assistance. For example, the routine use of computer and internet-based systems. Next slide, please. The update ensures the entire workforce system is aware of current equal opportunity rights and responsibilities of beneficiaries and recipients of WIOA Title I financial assistance. This new rule increases equality of opportunity for the millions of job applicants, training participants, program beneficiaries, and employees of recipients who interact with the workforce development system each year. Next slide, please. The rules updates also enhance access to the system, in particular for people with disabilities, individuals with limited English proficiency, transgender individuals, and individuals who are pregnant, have had a child, or have related medical conditions. Next slide, please. Our revised regulations implement the non-discrimination and equal opportunity obligations under WIOA Section 188. Section 188 prohibits discrimination against individuals in any WIOA Title I financially assisted program or activity, which includes job training for adults and youth, and programs or activities provided by recipients at American Job Centers, which some people may know as one-stop centers. Next slide, please. These programs or activities may not refuse to offer or provide services to individuals because of their race, color, religion, sex, national origin, age, discrimination, or political affiliation or belief. Discrimination on these bases is also prohibited against employees who are employed in the administration of or in connection with any WIOA Title I financially assisted program or activity. Next slide, please. Additionally, beneficiaries, applicants, and participants, as defined by the final rule, cannot be denied covered services because of their citizenship status and cannot be denied their rights because of participation in a WIOA Title I financially assisted program or activity. Next slide. The rule applies to recipients of WIOA Title I financial assistance and to programs and activities that are operated by American Job Center partners, one-stop partners, as part of the American Job Center system, also known as a one-stop delivery system. And those include unemployment insurance, temporary assistance for needy families, also known as TANF, adult education, trade adjustment assistance, and others. Next slide, please. Now I'd like to highlight some of the changes in the Section 188 final rule as compared to the 1999 and 2015 earlier rules. The final rule updates the non-discrimination and equal opportunity provisions to align them with current law and legal principles. The rule captures developments since 1999 under a variety of laws reflected in case law and in regulations issued by other federal agencies, including the Department of Justice and the Equal Opportunity Commission. Those laws and regulations include Title VI and Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972, my favorite, the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, and of course the ADA Amendments Act of 2008, and Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. Next slide, please. Rules updated provisions generally reflect obligations already imposed by changes to these other non-discrimination and equal opportunity laws. Next slide, please. Okay. The final rule ensures protection from discrimination based on pregnancy. The rule makes clear that sex discrimination includes discrimination based on pregnancy, childbirth, and related medical conditions in accord with the Pregnancy Discrimination Act of 1978, which amended Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and in accord with Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972. Next slide, please. The final rule safeguards meaningful access to the workplace system for persons with limited English proficiency, which we often refer to by the acronym LEP. The regulations clarify that discrimination based on national origin includes failing to provide language services to someone with limited English proficiency. Under the rule, recipients must take reasonable steps to ensure that individuals with limited English proficiency have meaningful access to aid, benefits, service, and training. Next slide, please. These steps may include oral interpretation and written translation of both hard copy and electronic materials into non-English languages. This ensures that individuals with limited English proficiency are informed about or able to participate in covered programs or activities. Next slide, please. In addition, the rule clarifies which documents contain vital information and thus must be translated into languages spoken by a significant number or portion of the population eligible to be served or likely to be encountered. Next slide, please. The term vital information means information, whether written, oral, or electronic, that is necessary for an individual to understand how to obtain any aid, benefit, service, and or training, necessary for an individual to obtain any aid, benefit, service, and or training, or required by law. The rule requires recipients to record the limited English proficiency and preferred language of applicants who seek to participate in the workforce development system to help ensure they have the necessary information to serve individuals with limited English proficiency effectively. Finally, an appendix to the LEP section of the rule describes promising practices to help recipients comply with their legal obligations and includes the components of a plan to facilitate meaningful access for individuals with limited English proficiency. Next slide. You can flip to the next one, too. Thank you. The final rule ensures equal access to the workforce system for people with disabilities by bringing the regulations in line with updated disability rights law. Section 188 ensures non-discrimination and equal opportunity in the workforce development system for individuals with disabilities. The final rule supports this goal in a number of ways. For example, by reiterating the requirements that facilities, programs, services, technology, and materials must be physically and programmatically accessible, and that auxiliary aids and services may be required to ensure that communications with individuals with disabilities are as effective as communication with others. The rule brings the CRC regulations in accord with the Americans with Disabilities Act Amendments Act of 2008 and the implementing regulations and guidance issued by the Department of Justice, as well as the implementing regulations and guidance issued by the Equal Opportunity Employment Commission. Next slide, please. The rule's updated language ensures that the definition of disability will be interpreted broadly, which will enable more individuals with disabilities to be effectively served within the workforce development system. The rule also addresses accessibility requirements, such as for information and electronic technologies and service animals. Next slide, please. The final rule ensures that recipients and beneficiaries are aware of the full scope of their responsibilities and rights. The Civil Rights Center revised the Equal Opportunity Notice or poster that recipients are required to display and distribute in order to ensure that they and individuals participating in their programs and activities are aware of the scope of the non-discrimination and equal opportunity responsibilities and recent developments in law. As the final rule explains, the Civil Rights Center will make translations of this notice available to recipients in the 10 most frequently used languages in the U.S., other than English. Next slide, please. Changes in the language of the notice are supposed to reflect, for example, that sex as a prohibited basis for discrimination includes pregnancy, childbirth, and related medical conditions, and other items such as sex stereotyping. Similarly, the changes make clear that discrimination against persons with limited English proficiency is a form of national origin discrimination. Next slide, please. The final rule outlines protections against sex discrimination. The rule states that discrimination on the basis of status, gender identity, and sex stereotyping are forms of sex discrimination in accord with similar developments under other civil rights laws. Next slide, please. The rule specifically states that Section 188's prohibition of discrimination on the basis of sex includes, at a minimum, sex discrimination related to an individual's sexual orientation where the evidence establishes that the discrimination is based on gender stereotypes. The Civil Rights Center anticipates that the law regarding sex discrimination will continue to evolve, and the Civil Rights Center will monitor legal developments in this area. Next slide, please. That was a quick overview of the final rule. As you can tell, we worked hard on producing a rule that protects individuals from discrimination in the nation's workforce system, balances the needs of both the people who have to follow the regulations and the people who are protected by them, and strives to communicate very complex obligations in a straightforward and clear way so that it is easier for people to understand and follow. If you represent or work with individuals with disabilities who are interested in participating, or you're a person with a disability and are participating already in the workforce system, I want to encourage you to form a relationship with the equal opportunity officers, both locally and at the state level. Under our rule, there's a requirement for both state and local equal opportunity officers. The rule emphasizes the need for recipients to reach out to community groups, but you can help by taking the first step. The equal opportunity officers can gain from your knowledge and experiences by sharing problems and solutions, and potential discrimination can be averted or avoided. Lastly, I wanted to talk a little bit about the complaint process. Our final rule provides that each recipient must have a complaint process and that they are required to publicize the process. Remember also that there's a required notice that includes how people can file a complaint that is given to every individual applying for or participating in the workforce system. There are 2 points I want to make. First, filing locally should be your preferred course. We find that complaints can be resolved faster when filed locally. Well, what does filing locally mean? Again, it goes back to contacting the state or local equal opportunity officer. Second, individuals always have the ability to file a new complaint with the Civil Rights Center if they are not satisfied after filing locally. Notice I didn't say appeal. A complaint to the Civil Rights Center is considered a new complaint, and if the Civil Rights Center accepts the complaint, the Civil Rights Center will begin the investigative process anew. I encourage all of you to read our new WIOA Section 188 regulations, which can be found through the links on our website, www.dol.gov/CRC. Our site will connect you to the Federal Register website, where you can read or print a copy of the new regulations. Our site also contains additional information in alternative languages for individuals with limited English proficiency. Thank you all very much for listening, and now I'll hand it back to Michael Morris.
Thank you, Lee. I have a lot of questions, but I've been told to hold them until we get through the other presentations. So let me turn next to Jamie Robinson, who is a member of the staff of the LEAD Center and at National Disability Institute, Manager, Financial Empowerment and Workforce. Jamie has been working with Danielle Smith, the State Equal Opportunity Officer in the state of Missouri, Division of Workforce Development. Jamie is going to speak first and share some of exactly how the work of the LEAD Center is providing support to helping people understand Section 188, as well as utilize other resources like the 188 Disability Reference Guide. So Jamie, let me turn it over to you first before we then go to Danielle.
Okay, thank you, Michael, and thank you, Lee, for the overview of the new 188 regulations. So good afternoon, everyone. While there is no one pathway to ensuring equal opportunity and non-discrimination in the workforce system, we do have this incredible collection of very diverse, promising practices that have been gathered from workforce regions nationally that have already significantly expanded access to individuals with disabilities. And these strategies were released in 2015. They are now part of Promising Practices in Achieving Universal Access and Equal Opportunity, a Section 188 Disability Reference Guide. And this was jointly developed by the Civil Rights Center, the Employment and Training Administration, Office of Disability Employment Policy, and also with support and assistance from LEAD Center. So the strategies in this guide really emphasize how to use Section 188 as a framework for improving access, for improving equal opportunity, and ultimately to increase employment outcomes for people across the spectrum of disability. So the guide directly correlates with the non-discrimination, equal opportunity, and universal access requirements in 188. It's a tool that can be used by any of you. You can reference it collaboratively. It can be used by state and local equal opportunity officers, workforce development professionals, and American Job Center partners to learn about the strategies that not only meet compliance regulations, but also can really open up employment opportunities for people with disabilities. It does not create new legal requirements or change current legal requirements. They do not preclude states or recipients from devising alternative approaches, which we hope you will. We know you are, and we really want to learn more about them as we move forward. And adoption of the promising practices will not guarantee compliance. So there are 3 major sections in the guide, and each have a variety of subcategories that, again, correspond with Section 188. And the first section is all about universal access, and here's a list of the categories in that section. So each of these topics include many different types of strategies and promising practices that have been implemented across workforce centers nationwide, all towards improving access along that entire customer flow for customers with disabilities. You have understanding local needs, marketing and outreach, involving community groups and schools, effective collaboration, including partnerships, intake, registration, and orientation, staff training, assessments and screening, and service delivery. So when we stay kind of within that one section for a minute and look at the focus of universal access, there are some kind of recurring themes that come out throughout all of the strategies. And the first one here is partnerships with diverse disability groups. And I want to start by saying, echoing what Lee said about including your equal opportunity officers. They really are kind of your first partner in all of this work. But we see a lot of promising practices that involve American Job Centers engaging organizations across the spectrum of disability. So that might mean a state or local workforce board, including individuals with disabilities in the design, the delivery of services. That could mean American Job Centers coordinating with different types of disability agencies to help, assess their physical, their communication, their programmatic access. And that will help job centers, and we're learning from these promising practices, that we can learn from the lens of a customer with physical disabilities, a deaf customer, someone who's blind, an individual with developmental disabilities, or who has a mental health disability. The second theme here is resource mapping and coordination. You'll see in the guide, you'll learn a lot about American Job Centers that have taken the time to really learn about the resources in their region, what is around them, and engaging in that cross-training with different service systems to improve partnership. And that can lead to greater coordination of resources, of funding, which can help meet employment goals of job seekers with multiple resource needs. And some of you may recognize that strategy out there, and that is the Integrated Resource Team. The next one is around disability knowledge of staff. We see that disability program navigators, disability resource coordinators are noted throughout the guide. Obviously, they provide, critical support to American Job Center customers and staff around disability, around accessibility, disclosure issues, accommodations. In regions without specialized staff, having those frequent opportunities to build disability knowledge is crucial, which brings us to the next theme, training opportunities around disability. You can see in the guide there are many strategies that promote kind of ongoing disability-related training with regional partners involved. And you'll hear from Missouri how they did that in a little bit. And you'll also read that some regions used kind of very concrete scenario-based training around what's going on in the center, what are the challenges, and really using those scenarios to train and emphasize how staff can become more comfortable with discussing disability, providing accommodations, and just kind of overall having empowered to jointly work with customers with other agencies, including vocational rehabilitation. And the last theme here is that staff need to know resources. They need to have some trusted go-to resources, and that can be really on any level, whether that means picking up the phone to call a VR counselor next door and asking them some questions and working together, or maybe that is accessing the Job Accommodation Network and knowing how to do that. So moving into the second section of the Promising Practices Guide, it's all about equal opportunity. And the main topics in this section also include a number of effective strategies that you can learn about, learn what's going on in other regions to address some of the challenges. And so here you'll find strategies on topics that prohibit discrimination against people with disabilities, discrimination in employment practices, and also strategies that promote reasonable accommodations for people with disabilities, modifications of policies, practices, procedures, also programs and activities in the most integrated setting, effective communication with people with disabilities, and also strategies that address program, architectural, information, communication technology, accessibility. So again, we have some kind of recurring themes throughout this second section, and the first is an interactive process and procedures for reasonable accommodations. And this is often a pretty prevalent issue for job centers. Many have a policy in place, but they may not really have an interactive process where staff, feels empowered to kind of talk about accommodations, meet those needs with customers. Even simple things like giving extra time to take tests for the assessments, or offering assistive technology options, or even just moving into a private space to discuss disability. These come up a lot for workforce centers, and so you can read about some of the strategies that centers are taking. The next here is legal practices around basically talking about disability. There's excellent information here. CRC has put out really excellent training materials around this topic. And we know that American Job Center staff needs information around discussing disability, understanding that an individual does not need to use the term reasonable accommodation. The request does not have to be in writing. It could even be made by a family member or somebody else on their behalf. And this is a common issue that comes up for job centers if they're allowed to even ask about disability and how to discuss accommodation. So the guide provides a lot of different approaches to these things. And the next one here is representation of people with disabilities in all American Job Center services and programs. One critical promising practice that correlates to Section 188 is that American Job Center staff communicates to individuals with disabilities that they are entitled to the programs and services of the American Job Center, and they're not required to attend separate, different services for which they may be eligible. And the recurring strategy here is about informing customers, having some processes in place where people are informed of all available resources. And it's about engaging service providers versus kind of referring somebody out. And the last one, referrals of people with disabilities to separate programs are not automatic. A prominent theme in this section in equal opportunity is that American Job Center staff does not automatically refer job seekers with disabilities to the state vocational rehabilitation program. And we hope that this is not happening so much anymore, but we know if these strategies are not implemented, including staff training that's really kind of meeting them where they're at, or practices around discussing disability and accommodations are happening, that cross-agency collaboration is happening. These are the things that are needed to really support employment goals of customers with multiple resource needs. So here is a section where they talk a lot about these strategies. The third and last section of the guide is implementing universal access and equal opportunity, and this is largely centered on the role and responsibilities of the state and local equal opportunity officer. And they include the designation of an EOO, notice and communication, assurances, data and information collection, analysis and maintenance, monitoring for compliance and continuous improvement, complaint processing procedures, and corrective actions and sanctions. So this is a good opportunity here to hand it off to my colleague Danielle Wright. She is the State Equal Opportunity Officer for the Missouri Workforce Development, and I've had the pleasure of working with Danielle and her team along with the State Vocational Rehabilitation Director, Yvonne Wright. And so Danielle, with that, I'll hand it over to you. And you might be on mute.
Thank you, Jamie. Next slide, please.
No problem.
Well, in 2010, the CRC monitored Missouri for EO compliance, and a lot of people may think that being monitored is a negative thing that occurs, but for us, we looked at it as a positive thing because there were some things that we needed to improve on with our non-discrimination and equal opportunity program. So we decided to take this time to revamp our whole non-discrimination and equal opportunity program. So we chose to focus on disability, and that's because disability cuts across race, age, gender, sexual orientation, gender identity, ethnicity, religion, and social economic status. And it's the only minority group that anyone can join at any time. So the Section 188 Disability Reference Guide was basically our blueprint on improving equal opportunity for our programs and services. Next slide, please. So the key to implementing your non-discrimination and equal opportunity program is leadership, and you have to have buy-in from the top. So we thought we should train our leadership staff on what obligations we have under WIOA for equal opportunity with our programs and services. And next, we offered them the opportunity to attend the NASWA Equal Opportunity Conference. And we had a lot of positive feedback, and because this is how we were able to partner with the LEAD Center. Michael Holmes from St. Louis, he's the Workforce Development Director for that region. He was able to reach out at that conference and partner with the LEAD Center. And from there, we have been partnering on a lot of different initiatives that has helped Missouri with their equal opportunity and non-discrimination program. But from that initiative and that partnership, we first developed a climate survey for our job center staff, our customers, and employees, employers. Next slide, please. So from our survey findings, we found out that our local EO officers, our management staff, and even our frontline staff were in need of some disability-related training. And we also found out that we need to make sure that that all individuals are able to access programs and services in our job centers. And from that survey, a lot of staff stressed that there needs to be refresher training on the assistive technology equipment that's in the job centers, because if you don't use it, you will lose it, and so that was something that they were stressing, that they didn't know how to use some of the assistive technology equipment. So what we thought we would do is develop some cross-training and partner with some organizations in our state. And of course, we have Vocational Rehabilitation, who is co-located in our job center, that participated in some cross-training. But we also reached out to the Great Plains ADA Center in Columbia, Missouri, and the Centers for Independent Living. They provided some training to each one of our job centers that really helped our staff have a better understanding of how to serve individuals with disabilities. And one thing that we wanted to focus in on was making sure that our staff and our customers were aware of the reasonable accommodation policies and procedures. And I want to stress that this is not just for our customers, it's also for our employees too. So we wanted them to go back and review what's in their reasonable accommodation policy to make sure it is easily made available to our customers. And one thing that we did find out from our survey findings is that our employers were wanting more information on how to recruit and accommodate people with disabilities. Next slide, please. So some action steps from our pilot is we've put together some training and three-part series for our local EO officers, for our management and frontline staff, and we made it more scenario-based so that the training could be relatable. We also, like I said before, we reviewed, had our local boards review their reasonable accommodation policies, and then we revised and trained our staff on case notes. And instead of training to document case notes, we're training our staff to say service notes and to document the services that that customer received. And if there was any disability-related information, that should be kept in a separate file away from the service notes. And so we revamped that, and I think that was probably one of our more successful trainings that we provided to our staff. And then we also charged our local boards to develop strategic outreach plans, and this is a result of them implementing and conducting their data analysis monitoring. And so with that, the outreach plan identifies different areas that they need to address with different groups of people. So a lot of times we have found from our data analysis that people do not like to disclose their disability status, and that might be because the Career Center may not be inviting enough, letting people know who come in there that we can assist them if they have a disability. So we've been really working on trying to make sure we are connecting with our community and letting them know that we service everyone. Another action item from our pilot was having an annual survey with our workforce staff to just basically give us some feedback on what type of training that they would like to see, or what they're needing or what they're lacking. And we also were able to have our workforce business rep partner with the Voc Rehab staff with outreaching to the employers that were wanting more assistance with recruiting people with disabilities. Next slide, please. So basically, we have a really good partnership with our state vocational rehabilitation division, and they have participated and assisted with us developing the training for our job centers, and their staff has participated as well. So we feel like we are there with our partnerships, but we know we still have some work to do to get everyone on board. We have also worked with the Lead Center to revamp some of our surveys and our assessment tools so that we can make it more relatable and provide more scenarios, because we found that our staff really like the scenario-based training. Also, we have made sure that our local EO officers have support from from their management, because if the local EO officer doesn't have support from the top, it's very difficult for the local EO officer to implement all of the requirements under WIOA to ensure that they are trying to be in compliance with the program's obligations. And so we've also assigned action items after the local staff have participated in training, and some of the action items that the local staff were able to engage with were outreaching to the community and to see if they could bring back some information to our job centers from different community organizations that deal with people with disabilities, and let them know that we also service people with disabilities so that we could team up and service all customers that have disabilities. Next slide. So our lessons that we have learned is that you have to have support from the top up for your equal opportunity officers, and you have to continue to engage with your staff by surveying them and also surveying your customers and your business customers. That's very important. And we feel like it's very important that you collaborate with your core partners, your WIOA core partners. A lot of times they have information that they can bring to the table that could be shared with everyone so that we can all be able to service our customers equally. And we just really feel like a best practice out of all of this has been the hands-on training and assigning action items for our staff to do so that they can feel like they're a part of the solution process when they're assisting a customer get through programs and services. And we just want to make sure that going forward that we continue the ongoing training to our core partners, our leadership, and our frontline staff. Next slide.
Okay, let me thank Lee, Jamie, Danielle for really covering such a wide range of issues and really opportunities related to the Section 188. And we will now turn to questions. I have some that were prepared in advance, and I have others that the hundreds of you who have joined with us today from across the country have also put some excellent questions in the chat box. So let me start with the first question, and it relates to the 188 guide. The 188 guide, of course, was written before the final rule, but let me ask this of Lee. Do you still see it helping states in implementing WIOA's new disability-related provisions?
Lee, you may be on mute.
Do you want to answer that?
There you
I'm sorry, we were on mute. How do you see the 188 guide helping states in implementing WIOA's new disability-related provisions? Well, first of all, the 188 guide provides such a rich plethora of examples that states can review and elect to implement across all of the areas of the actual regulations, so that if there are particular areas that the state is interested in finding particular suggestions to, all they have to do is look at the guide. These examples, as was mentioned earlier, were collected from across the nation with American Job Centers providing information about successful practices that they have used, and we kind of put those all together and put them in a very usable format so that they can be accessed easily through the guide. So we feel like through the guide, information is available for what states can choose. As was said earlier, this is not a compliance document. It is an educational tool, a technical assistance document to help states see examples of what can be done in each area in order to provide equal access for people with barriers to employment, including people with disabilities. Many of the examples are obviously for people with disabilities, but because there is a universal design in the approach, they are applicable to many individuals with barriers to employment. So useful on many fronts. Lee, do you have anything further to add?
Yeah, I would say I second everything that Chris said. You know, the 188 guide's value is that it's really lays out a lot of promising practices in achieving universal access and equal opportunity for individuals with disabilities and others, as she's pointed out. You know, I think for people who have less of an orientation in this area, it's a good starting place to help a person or an office or individual start thinking about things in a different way in terms of inclusion and equal opportunity and specific tasks that can be undertaken in order to really include people with disabilities in a meaningful way. You know, sometimes, because many of us focus on issues for individuals with disabilities over such a long period of time and on an ongoing basis, it's easy for us to immediately think of answers. But for people who have more diverse responsibilities and who are responsible for covering not only disability issues, but maybe sex discrimination issues, maybe LEP issues, it might be a little more difficult and they might have less practice. And I think looking at the Section 188 guide really gives, if you start reading through it, really gives folks an opportunity to start thinking and putting on sort of the disability hat about ways in which to accommodate and include people with disabilities. I think it's very helpful in that regard, and it's a useful tool to start sort of sorting through some of those issues. I know Danielle talked about the experience in Missouri. You know, for people who run AJCs or one-stops, you know, they handle a lot of things on a daily basis, and, you know, to get them as a way to sort of orient people who are not used to thinking primarily about disability issues, the Section 188 guide is a really good starting point, and there's some really good ideas about where you start and how to think about things and what the requirements are.
You know, in addition to that, I think that how Missouri, Danielle and Jamie spoke just a few minutes ago about how Missouri had used the guide to help kind of organize their training in the state. That was such a clever use of the guide statewide, and I think allowed some of the areas of technical assistance to really kind of emerge. The case note example was just a wonderful one. It was one that had not crossed my mind as I thought about what an EO officer or what AJC staff would be thinking about, but once they explained that had emerged and their questioning it, of course, it was very logical. So I think that there are, beyond looking at the guide individually, if you're an EO officer, there are ways to use the guide more systemically, as the state of Missouri has done, to help as kind of an infrastructure or an organizational element to help you figure out how to provide your training.
And I'll just say really quickly, this is Andy from ODEP. When I first came on to ODEP, one of my first tasks was looking at the guide, and I found it very user-friendly from someone coming into the federal space, but also coming from the CIL space. I thought, you know what, this is something that could be utilized by HACs and CILs very easily. So I just think it has a very universal tone to it, which is great.
Thank you, Andy and Lee and Chris. I want to go to a different kind of question. And there is the question on the screen. I'll read it, but I want to go to one of the questions that was in the chat box, which is related to it. The question on the screen is, if an individual with a disability encounters an accessibility or other challenge in accessing effective and meaningful supports and services from the American Job Center, what should they do? We're going to come back to that question in a moment. I think there was a great question in the chat box, and this has to do with the challenges an individual with a disability may face in even getting to the AJC, challenges of transportation, or challenges in terms of even needing mobility assistance. And I want to throw that out first, and then we'll get to the more general question about what should you do if you encounter challenges. So the question very specifically from the chat box is, does the equal opportunity and access to reasonable accommodations carry over to even the issue of whether a person with a disability can get themselves to the AJC? Would anyone want to try to tackle that question?
You're on.
No, it's an ADA. Oh. That's a difficult and complicated question, Michael, and I appreciate the thought that went into it. I think I give you the typical lawyer answer is it depends. So it really depends on what it is that the individual needs to be accommodated. If you look at the disability provisions in our Section 188 rule, they're the same provisions that are in the ADA and the ADA Amendments Act in Section 504. So, if under the ADA and under Section 504, you'd have the right to an accommodation, you'd have the right to auxiliary aids and services, you'd have the right to reasonable modification of policies, practices, and procedures, you'd have the same right in trying to access the services under Section 188 at the AJC. However, the most common case that would arise in that scenario would be, we are all familiar with under the ADA, if there's an entity that's not physically accessible, under Title II of the ADA and under Section 504, if they're in an old building that's not been replaced or which there's not been alterations, then the entity, the Title II state or local governmental entity, such as an AJC, needs to figure out a way to provide the service to the individual under the concept of what used to be called program accessibility and still program accessibility, which means when you look at the program in its entirety, it's accessible for people with individuals with disabilities. So, under the off chance that there's a one-stop office or a partner office that's not accessible for people with disabilities, the immediate answer, it can't be that the person can't get the services. Between the one-stop and the individual, they need to figure out a way in which to provide the service. There have been, since the passage of the ADA, a number of court cases on this issue specifically. The ADA also has an integration mandate, but really pushes to try to give services in the most integrated manner. So, but there are some cases that will arise. There are some, for example, places that are not accessible, need to figure out a way to provide those services. Sometimes that could mean sending somebody to your house, meeting at a common location that's accessible, meeting in another closer building that has accessibility where the person with a disability can get there as well as the person from the one-stop. So it takes a little creativity with respect to that. So I think, physical accessibility should never be a denial a denier. I don't even know if that's a word. Physical accessibility should never be a reason for denial. How's that? It's probably better. Physical accessibility should never be a reason for denying a person with a disability access to the services or programs to which they're entitled. You know, the provider or in this case, the recipient always needs to try to figure out a way to provide the services to the individual. And if it means meeting in a different location or meeting by phone or coming out to the person's house or just being creative and finding that solution, that's a requirement under our Section 188 rules and also a requirement under the ADA.
Can I just add something? This is Jamie. I would echo that, and I think that a lot of helping the workforce community and the partners to understand that we want them to be solution-based. We want them to not stop there, you know, do a bit of resource, you know, coordination. And I mean, I think that we would want workforce staff and community to pick up the phone, call a Center for Independent Living, see what can we find out about transportation resources, and really continue to work with that customer to find a solution and be solution-based. And leadership in the workforce centers and the workforce investment boards really need to empower staff to be more solution-based so that they can do those things comfortably.
Excellent. Let me offer the opportunity. Roger DeCampo has joined us from the Civil Rights Center. Did you want to weigh in on this question?
Yeah, I'm just going to throw in that many of the services provided on a one-stop, you don't have to physically go in there anymore. So a lot of it's virtual. You can access it from anywhere. So some of the transportation issue kind of goes away. There are other issues around that, but just want to throw that in there.
Yes. I think excellent. Now let me go back to the question on the screen, which is the broader one, not just limited to access in terms of transportation or mobility, but regardless of what an individual with disability may find challenging, may relate to access to a particular type of training. It may relate to opportunities for skills development, whatever it is. This is the broader question. And Danielle, I want to come back to you because let's take the state-specific example. If an individual with a disability encounters an accessibility or other challenge at the AJC, what would happen in Missouri? What is going on?
Danielle, you may still be muted.
I'm sorry. Hopefully in Missouri, our staff would be able to assist that person, that individual, with accessing any information or anything that they need. But if they're not able to do that, I would hope that they would, you know, filter them to their local EO officer to see if there's any resources or anything available that the local EO officer can provide them with assistance. So, you know, we want to make sure our staff is trained up to be able to assist that customer if they encounter any problems. But if they are encountering any problems, they should be able to go to their local EO officer, and if their local EO officer is not able to assist that person, then they would channel that person up to the state.
Thank you, Danielle. And Roger or Lee, any additional comment on that prior question, just in terms of
I think challenge? Yeah, we support that wholeheartedly. Is that we find that an individual can contact someone locally, they get the problem fixed faster, more effectively than we can do. But if they can't get satisfaction there, they can always follow with the state or with us, and we'd be more than happy to look into it. So, yeah, do it local first.
Excellent. Let me, in the interest of time, let's move to another question. One of the true pillars of the new law, WIOA, is building career pathways for job seekers. Is there any facet of Section 188 that provides protections of equal opportunity in accessing career services and/or career pathways for job seekers with disabilities? And that, I guess, we'll throw back to Chris or Lee or Roger.
Well, Section 188, thank you, Michael, for that question. Section 188 is a non-discrimination equal opportunity rule and contains provisions in order to promote those items, non-discrimination and equal opportunity. It doesn't talk specifically about career services and career pathways within the rule. That being said, you know, there's a lot of things written in WIOA itself that really promotes career services and career pathways for job seekers with disabilities. Some of those can be found sort of in the general language of WIOA. Some of them can be found in the purposes section of the reauthorization of the Rehabilitation Act, which is Title IV of WIOA. And so there's a lot of focus on really giving individuals with disabilities equal access to career services, career pathways, employment programs, and not just restricted in the VR space, but rather across the board, and that the priority should be, you know, giving people with disabilities the same opportunities as everyone else. That goal is also echoed, of course, in the Section 188 regulations, because that's a priority there too. So I guess the short answer is, while there's not specific language that calls out career services and career pathways in the Section 188 rule, the concepts and the responsibilities that are inherent in Section 188 certainly apply to those.
And this is Chris. Michael, I'd like to add to what Lee said by saying that the Department of Labor is implementing, the Employment Training Administration and ODEP implementing collaboratively a grant initiative called the Disability Employment Initiative, which has a focus on career pathways and inclusion of youth and adults with disabilities in career pathways. As Lee indicated, as you indicated, it is career pathways is a major focus now across the WIOA, and Department of Labor has been committed to making sure that people with disabilities can benefit, and through the DEI we are developing strategies and models for inclusion of people with disabilities in career pathways, both youth and adults. So using some of the information that we are in the process of learning, we also are going to be collaborating with CRC and ETA later this year to collect additional examples of exemplary practice, of successful practices that could be added to the 188 guide to provide additional examples in a plethora of areas, including specific to career pathways.
Thank you, Chris. I want to come back to a more general question and really get both perspectives, state and those of you at the federal level. And maybe, again, let me start with Danielle and Jamie in terms of what you see as the greatest barriers to Section 188 implementation at a community level.
Well, this is Danielle. I feel like the greatest barrier could be if your leadership team is not on board with the obligations under WIOA for Section 188, that could be a huge barrier for getting your non-discrimination and equal opportunity program up in your community.
And I think probably one of the biggest challenges really, it starts at the community level. It's really when workforce staff is not outreaching and not connecting with the disability community. If, there's not a connection there, whether it's local or regional, whatever is around that system, that workforce system, it's really hard to address physical, communication, programmatic access from all these different lenses. And to really have an understanding of it, you have to have the partnerships in place, and you need to do what you do best. The workforce staff needs to do what they do best, and they need to partner with people who understand a lot more about access and things that there can be a lot of cross-training that goes on.
And Chris or Lee or Roger, from the perspective at your level, at the federal level, any additional comment?
I guess I would just echo, this is Lee, I guess I would just echo, what Danielle and Jamie had to say. I mean, with respect to including people with disabilities, making sure staff understand the requirements of the Section 188 regulations, and then following through to make accessibility and inclusion of individuals with disabilities a priority. And I think from the opposite side, for people with disabilities who may have not always had a great experience, with the AJC or one-stop system, I would encourage them to give it another try. It's the goal at the end of the day for all of us is to make the system run better in a more inclusive way, and to ensure that individuals with disabilities get the services that they need through the one-stops. And while it might be frustrating at times, and while every person that we encounter might not be give us the perfect response, I think that if we continue to really focus on making it better and making it more inclusive, then it will happen. All you have to do is look at the work that Danielle and Missouri have done in terms of sort of reforming sort of the way in which the whole state and the workforce system really encounters individuals with disabilities, includes individuals with disabilities, and has retrained their staff about interacting with people with disabilities to make sure that they really implement the goals of accessibility and inclusion throughout all their centers. And I think that's the goal that all of us should have, and I think that they've done an outstanding job.
Go ahead. This is Andy from ODEP. Thinking way outside the box, I think this is a really great opportunity for potentially the AJCs to look at maybe hiring people with disabilities, and maybe looking at that as an opportunity to, while you're opening the door for people to come into the AJCs and feel welcomed, hiring somebody that knows the ADA, knows Section 188, and can provide you that experience on a daily basis could really open the door on expanding your community outreach to the disability community.
And this is Chris. Just one last comment, certainly echoing everything that has been said so far, but both Danielle and Jamie mentioned the importance of partnership, as did Lee. And that is, in fact, partnership and collaboration is a major tenet of the WIOA, and is very much a focus of all of the rollout activities I know that certainly we've been doing here at the federal level with partners across the federal government. And to the extent that that kind of collaboration and partnership is happening, it just seems to me that there's going to be more outreach to and inclusion of the full range of individual and potential customers of the job centers, including those with disabilities.
Thank you. Wonderful answers. And let me go quickly, try to get a few more questions in. This relates to the role of state and local workforce development boards, a key foundational piece that creates policies and oversees the performance of the American Job Centers and the workforce development system, both at a local and a state level. And maybe I'll go to Lee first about this, is You might have been the individual who added this particular section to the law, and that is that there is a requirement of doing an accessibility review and report in terms of what's happening at the local level. And I do believe the state board has responsibility for development of the standards to use to evaluate the accessibility taking place at the community level. Can you talk a little bit about that, Lee, and is that incorporated under 188?
Thank you for the question, Michael. You know, the local workforce development boards have an important role in the process. They do have responsibility to do accessibility evaluations. And in terms of setting the standards, I think, you know, there are requirements under Section 188 about which standards need to be applied in particular circumstances in terms of making sure that the one-stops are physically accessible as well as programmatically accessible for individuals with disabilities. You know, it's one of those things where it's an ongoing requirement. Historically, there's been some disagreement about how accessible, you know, the AJCs and the AJC partners are. I think it's helpful on the ground to have, you know, another set of folks looking at it with the local workforce development boards on an ongoing basis. You know, the more frequently that they can take a look at it, the better off we all are. You know, you never want to have a person with a disability show up at their local AJC or one-stop or partner office and find out that either it's not physically accessible or more likely that there's a problem with the programmatic accessibility issues. You know, they can't get auxiliary aids or services, or, you know, they're having difficulty getting reasonable accommodations, et cetera. So I think that they do play a really important role in this whole process. You know, this is sort of, you know, I think a lot of our conversation today has been kind of, it takes a village to make all of this happen. It takes the work of all of us to make this really the best system possible. And, you know, we can't rely on just somebody else to do it. It takes the responsibility of folks in the disability community to be strong advocates. It takes responsibility of folks like Danielle in Missouri to take a leading role in helping train folks in the state. And it takes the responsibility of, you know, our office, CRC, ODAP, so many others. And I just think that it really takes work for all of us to try to put this together and really make it the best system that we can, that will really be inclusive of all people with disabilities when they try to get services that they need through the workforce development system.
But, you know, one thing I like about the new law, and this is part of what you're not taking enough credit for this, is civil rights at one point was just in Section 188. So if you're looking for how to service someone with an individual disability, it was only in this 188 part of the civil rights. So now under WIOA, it's not there. It's also in the programmatic stuff. If you want to run an effective one-stop center, you have to find ways to service with individuals with disabilities. So you'll see this in our role in the civil rights, but you also see it in ETAs and their programmatic roles, which is kind of the beauty of what I like of what the work you did when you're up in the Hill. It's more than just civil rights issue. It's if you want to run an effective one-stop, you have to demonstrate you have the ability to service people with individuals. Right? It's a performance measure.
Thank you, Roger.
Chris, just one quick additional comment, and I think that is one of the reasons why the 188 guide can really be useful. Again, it ties back to examples that states and locals can do to, you know, to make things physically and programmatically accessible and to provide effective services at their AJCs. So we're really we have been since it was released, but we continue to be very excited about the 188 guide for that reason.
Thank you, Chris. And we're just down to the last 2 minutes. I want to ask, as I often do moderating these webinars for the LEAD Center, kind of a closing comment. What's the takeaway piece of advice, one piece of advice, very concise. Let me go to Danielle first for our audience across the country.
Danielle, you're still muted. There you are.
Okay, I'm sorry. I think the best thing you could do is read the Section 188 guide. I think it's useful to the programs and the services in our America Job Center. So I just think you should start there.
Excellent. And Jamie, one piece of advice for our listeners across the country.
I say it's to partner. You really can't impact access on all of these levels that we're talking about, from getting in the door to career pathways, without diverse partnerships, so that you can leverage resources needed by people with disabilities that have multiple resource needs to reach employment.
Okay, and maybe go next to Lee. One piece of advice.
Now, this is probably my only moment of self-promotion of myself and Roger and CRC. We spent a lot of time writing the new rule to make it as great as possible. And I encourage folks, if they have time, to take a look at the rule itself, and particularly take a look at, in the preamble part of the rule, it talks about sort of what the legal provisions mean, and we also respond to comments that people had sent in, and as a way to sort of discuss the important concepts in the rule. If you have a chance, you can focus it, if you want, just around sort of the disability sections. I also encourage you to take a look at the other sections. The disability sections, a lot of it is in the definition section, which is 38.4, and then the sections starting at 38, I think it's 38.12 to about 38.16 or 38.17. That is 38.16 or 38.17. Those sections really have to do with the disability provisions. They help sort of explain how we've, as we talked about earlier, based them on what the requirements are under the ADA and Section 504. And it helps give you some perspective about where we're headed and really the importance of all the concepts that we've talked about here today and that are familiar to so many of you on a daily basis.
Thank you, Lee. And Chris, 10 words or less?
Okay, 10 words or less. Disability, thank you, Lee, is throughout the WIOA. Roger is counting my words, and I'm already up to 10. It's really exciting. For people with disabilities across the country, if you have tried going to your AJC in years past, please come back. We've got great things that are happening and even better things that are going to happen in the future, in large part because of the great partnerships that are happening right now and the fabulous provisions in the law and the great 188 regulations and guide.
Thank you, Chris. And let me thank all our panelists today. Lively discussion that followed the presentations. On the screen is how you connect with the leadcenter.org. You can find links to the resource guide, a summary of the resource guide that's been referenced over and over again. And let's face it, beyond the law, beyond compliance, certainly should be a sense of optimism. People with disabilities want good jobs. They want wages that are higher. They want careers. The Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act is about presenting that framework, and Section 188 embraces and supports and reinforces that framework. I hope all of you have learned a lot today. This webinar will be archived on the Lead Center website. We urge you to go there, and we urge you, as you have heard today, to embrace people with disability as part of diversity and inclusion within the opportunities presented by the workforce development system. So thank you all for joining us today, and we hope you'll join us in the future. Visit the LEAD Center website. There'll be many, many more webinars over the course of the year. Thank you so much, and have a great afternoon. Take care.